My name is Alexandra, Alberda, and I am the Curator of Indigenous Perspectives at the Manchester Museum, and I'm the lead curator of the Belonging Gallery. So our inspiration was in redeveloping the galleries and the whole museum. We have very distinct galleries behind here on South Asian heritage as well as Chinese cultures, and that a lot of those spaces used to fill up a lot of different cultural collections and give a sense of identity to a lot of people. So we wanted another gallery that really established that it's very inclusive, and even if you don't see your cultures in these newer ones, you still are represented, and maybe that's the next development. And so the Belonging Gallery is the first permanent gallery, and it's meant to engender a sense of belonging when visitors come through. So we explore belonging in 5 different ways in order to kind of inspire that and ask visitors to put themselves in these stories too. So what you can expect from the gallery is something a little different than if you came to Manchester Museum. Some of our older and really lovely exhibitions that you'll recognize when you come in with a few tweaks, their type of interpretation is maybe that more traditional interpretation of museums, where look at these great objects, here's some description if you want to know what it's about. But here we really blended objects with comics in order to tell that. So it's a bit of art, it's a bit of the objects you're familiar with, and trying to imagine the stories behind them. So some of them are stories about the actual object, but some of them are stories about people and how those objects fit into their lives as a way to interpret rather than the traditional object label to tell you what the story is. And we're trying to encourage visitors to interpret their own kind of meanings from those stories rather than just kind of thinking they have to be beholden to the facts that are there. Very cool. Yeah, that's what we were trying to, and we also thought that comics and its type of writing that works really cuts across ages, and so it can also invite young people in and children in to say, yes, this is something exciting that you'll want to be engaged in too. Yeah. I think belonging is really important. So I'm part Jemez Pueblo, which is an indigenous people from southwestern America, as well as European descent, some English as well. And I've always felt in the threshold of different cultures. And so I think belonging in trying to approach it more inclusively is really important. Because if we don't look at the framework of how we tell stories and who gets to tell them and how they get edited and how they get presented, we ignore how that's built in to privilege certain cultures. We kind of sometimes believe that that's a cultureless framework, but it's not. And so I think belonging in here and trying to be more open, at times playful, at times very serious, at times asking people to imagine something differently, I think is really important for establishing that. And it's tragic whenever you hear that someone feels like they have to code switch when they come into a different space, or they have to become someone else, or they can't come into a different space. So I think something focused on belonging that tries to be different in how it presents belonging is also saying, we believe in this. We might not get it right all the time, and there might be new additions and different versions and more that we add to this. I have ambitions to add more to this gallery as it opens up to increase that inclusivity, working with communities to do those different elements, so that we're always working and it's seen as a space that is always trying to adapt as new voices and new people come in. My job was actually created, so most curators take care of a set of objects, but I sit across every collection, and my job is in decolonization and indigenization. And so that's why it was really important that we make sure that's embedded in here. So we try to make choices that do that and try to do careful research, understand where things come from, but also, someone asked me, well, what if that inspired every object in here to be repatriated? And I went, I also lead on the repatriation stuff with some of my other colleagues. I think we'd be fine with that. That'd be okay. And we need that, because if we're not, what I always say in the work I do with indigenous communities is whenever we start a new project, be it an exhibition or just learning about an object, repatriation, decolonization always has to be on the table from the beginning. Because it's also harmful if someone's like, well, what if people want it back? You go, oh, well, I didn't think of that. It's like, oh, so you were coming into our communities, but you didn't think of that. So it's actually reframing our assumptions, and that's where it feels real. So I'm glad that you had that experience, because that's, and I should say this gallery, even though I'm speaking to it, it was co-created with Michelle Scott and Rachel Petz, who are my co-curators here at the museum, but also when the artists wanted to tell their own stories, because we didn't ask anyone like, oh, you have refugee background experience, could you write a story for our museum? She was already making comics about life jackets because she wanted to break down the stereotype that gets associated with the life jacket to represent, and actually very similar to how we used to display it, even with good intention. So it's always trying to go beyond that and not stopping when you think you have a good intention. And if people came up and this develops through conversation, that's okay, because if we're not constantly in development and we break from that idea that museums are set in stone and we know the best way to present stories, we're never going to be inclusive, and it's just going to be tokenistic. And so we're really trying to grapple with that. And you see that in other galleries too, with how they've brought in different communities, and it's really challenged us. But yeah, I think that's very important to incorporate that in. I thought that was really important. And I should also say the Manchester stories were curated by Michelle Scott, who has lived here for much longer. So it's not American also being like, oh, I'll curate those stories. It was also bringing together the team that could also support the artists with that as well. So I think that's just so important, because otherwise I don't even get the like English American words right sometimes. And so it wouldn't feel authentic. So you have to work with people to do that. And then I'm glad to hear that we've done it right and that it feels that way, because that is the hope, is that then people come and they see themselves, they feel comfortable, and there's a space that you can come back to. And that's why we have the art cart here as well, which is like, if you've had an emotional experience, you can come and you can use that. And we recognize that this isn't just something where you go and objectively look at things, but actually you're going to be filled with emotions. You're going to be filled with those types of reactions. So having an outlet for that is also important. And like what you've said, is using the right terms. Yeah. Like nothing makes me more upset than someone going, oh, there was this uncomfortable moment. And I'm like, no, we know the right word. We know maybe it's racist, maybe it's sexist, maybe it's continued coloniality, it's colonialism still acting out. And so when we know what it is, we need to give it those names. Otherwise, it just seems like you're being passed aside.